The mop bucket rolled across the polished floor of the Naval Special Warfare Training Center as Marcus Thompson pushed it toward the locker room. At 62, his movements were deliberate but efficient, each step calculated to avoid the puddles of sweat and discarded gear that littered the training facility. The morning sun streamed through the high windows, casting long shadows across the gymnasium where tomorrow's elite warriors pushed their bodies to impossible limits. Marcus had been cleaning these floors for 3 years now. Every morning at 0500 hours, he arrived with his cart of supplies, his gray uniform pressed, and his work boots polished to military standard. The young SEALs barely noticed him as they rushed between training sessions, their minds focused on the grueling exercises that would either forge them into America's finest or send them back to regular Navy duty. The tattoo on his neck remained hidden beneath the high collar of his work shirt, a faded reminder of a different life. Most days, Marcus preferred it that way. The ink told a story that belonged to another man, another time, when his hands held weapons instead of cleaning supplies, and his voice commanded respect instead of requesting permission to mop around equipment. "Hey, old man, you missed a spot over there," called out Petty Officer Martinez, pointing to a corner near the pull-up bars. The young SEAL's tone wasn't malicious, just matter-of-fact, the way someone might speak to furniture or equipment. Marcus nodded silently and wheeled his bucket toward the indicated area. The training center buzzed with constant activity. Instructors barked orders at candidates who struggled through obstacle courses, their faces red with exertion and determination. Marcus had seen hundreds of them come through these doors over the years. Some had the fire in their eyes that spoke of future greatness. Others carried themselves with the kind of quiet confidence that only came from having already proven themselves in combat zones most people couldn't pronounce. As he worked, Marcus listened to fragments of conversation that drifted across the gymnasium. Plans for upcoming deployments, discussions about new equipment, debates over training methods that had evolved since his own time in service. The language was familiar, even if the technology had advanced beyond recognition. The brotherhood, however, remained unchanged. "Did you hear about the new CEO coming in next month?" One instructor mentioned to another as they passed Marcus's station. "Commander Richardson. Word is he's a real hard case, served multiple tours overseas." Marcus continued his work, wringing out the mop with practiced efficiency. He'd learned long ago that invisible people heard the most interesting conversations. The janitor who emptied trash cans and mopped floors became part of the landscape, present but unnoticed, like the American flag hanging in the corner or the motivational posters on the walls. The afternoon brought a different energy to the facility. Advanced trainees worked through specialized exercises while newer candidates struggled with basic requirements. Marcus watched them struggle with rope climbs and wondered if any of them understood that the man cleaning their equipment had once fast-roped from helicopters into hostile territory under cover of darkness. "Thompson, you need to clean the ready room before you leave today," called out Chief Petty Officer Williams, the facility's senior enlisted advisor. "We've got a VIP tour coming through tomorrow, and everything needs to be spotless." "Yes, Chief," Marcus replied, his voice carrying just enough military bearing to suggest prior service without drawing attention. Williams paused for a moment, studying Marcus's posture and the way he responded to orders, but then moved on to other duties. The ready room contained displays of SEAL history, photographs of legendary operators, and memorials to fallen warriors. Marcus cleaned around these artifacts with particular care, understanding their significance in ways that transcended his current position. Each photograph represented sacrifice. Each memorial honored blood spilled in distant places for causes larger than individual glory. As evening approached, and the facility grew quieter, Marcus found himself alone with his thoughts and the ghosts of memory. The young men who trained here reminded him of soldiers he'd once known, faces that grew sharper in his mind as the years passed. Some had made it home. Others remained forever young in places where poppies grew between the crosses. The custodial closet where Marcus stored his equipment sat adjacent to the main training floor. Through the small window, he could see the obstacle course that challenged every SEAL candidate. The rope climbs, wall traverses, and crawling pits designed to separate the determined from the merely interested. He remembered similar challenges from his own youth, though the specific obstacles had changed with evolving training doctrine. His reflection was interrupted by the sound of running footsteps. A group of candidates jogged past his window, their breathing labored but controlled. Their instructor called out corrections and encouragement, pushing them towards standards that seemed impossible until they were achieved. Marcus recognized the rhythm of military training, the careful balance between breaking people down and building them back up stronger. The clock on the wall showed 1900 hours when Marcus finally finished his rounds. The facility would reopen at dawn with fresh challenges for those brave enough or foolish enough to believe they could earn the trident. He gathered his supplies and headed toward the parking lot, where his old pickup truck waited among the newer vehicles driven by active-duty personnel. Tomorrow would bring another day of invisible service, another opportunity to contribute without recognition. Marcus had made peace with anonymity years ago, finding purpose in honest work and the knowledge that his small part kept the machine running smoothly. The young warriors who trained here deserved clean facilities and maintained equipment, even if they never knew the man who provided those things had once worn the same uniform with honor. The drive home took him through neighborhoods where American flags hung from front porches and yellow ribbon magnets decorated car bumpers. Most civilians had no idea what happened behind the walls of facilities like the one where Marcus worked. They slept peacefully, protected by warriors they would never meet, trained in places they would never see, by standards they could never imagine. His small apartment contained few reminders of his military service. A flag folded in a triangle sat on the mantelpiece, and a single photograph showed him in dress blues from decades past. The tattoo on his neck remained hidden beneath civilian clothes, a private reminder of public service that had shaped his character, but no longer defined his daily existence. As Marcus prepared for another early morning, he thought about the young SEALs who would return to training tomorrow. Their journey had just begun, while it had taken him to places they might someday go if duty called. The circle of service continued, with each generation taking responsibility from the last, carrying forward traditions earned through sacrifice and maintained through dedication. The alarm clock beside his bed was set for 0430 hours, allowing time for the drive to work and the preparation required to keep America's elite warriors focused on their training rather than the cleanliness of their facilities. It was honest work performed by an honest man who had already given his measure of service to his country and now contributed in different ways. Outside his window, the lights of the city twinkled like distant stars, each one representing lives protected by the sacrifices of those who served. Marcus closed his eyes and prepared for another day of invisible service, unaware that tomorrow would bring changes that would transform his carefully maintained anonymity into something far more complicated and meaningful than he could imagine. Commander Jake Richardson arrived at the Naval Special Warfare Training Center at 0600 hours sharp, his service uniform crisp and his bearing unmistakably military. 3 combat deployments and 15 years of active duty had given him the kind of presence that commanded immediate respect from subordinates and peers alike. His assignment to oversee training operations represented a significant step in his career, and he intended to maintain the facility's reputation for producing America's most elite warriors. The morning briefing covered routine operational matters, training schedules, equipment maintenance, personnel assignments, and facility management. Chief Petty Officer Williams outlined the day's activities while Richardson mentally cataloged areas that would require his immediate attention. Excellence in training required attention to every detail, from the most complex tactical exercises to the cleanliness of the facilities where future SEALs prepared for the challenges ahead. Who handles facility maintenance and custodial services? Richardson asked, reviewing the organizational chart that outlined responsibilities for every aspect of the training center's operation. We have a contract employee, Marcus Thompson, Williams replied. He's been here about 3 years. Reliable worker, keeps to himself, gets the job done without any problems. Shows up early, works hard, doesn't create any issues for the training staff. Richardson nodded, making a mental note to familiarize himself with all personnel who supported the mission, regardless of their official status. In his experience, the people who kept facilities running smoothly often possessed valuable insights about operations that might otherwise go unnoticed by leadership focused on broader strategic concerns. The tour of the facility impressed Richardson with its state-of-the-art equipment and meticulous maintenance. Every piece of training apparatus showed signs of heavy use, but also careful upkeep. The floors gleamed with professional-grade polish, and the locker rooms maintained a kind of cleanliness that prevented the health issues common to heavily used athletic facilities. Someone took pride in their work, and that attention to detail contributed to the overall excellence of the training environment. During the noon break, Richardson encountered Marcus for the first time. The older man was replacing towels in the main locker room, working with quiet efficiency that spoke of years of experience. Richardson observed him for several moments, noting the precise way Marcus folded and stacked the towels, the care he took to ensure adequate supplies at each station, and the respectful manner in which he stepped aside when active duty personnel needed access to equipment. "Thompson, isn't it?" Richardson addressed the janitor directly, extending his hand in greeting. "I'm Commander Richardson, the new commanding officer." Marcus accepted the handshake with a firm grip that surprised Richardson with its strength and confidence. "Welcome aboard, Commander. I hope the facility meets your standards." Something in Marcus's bearing caught Richardson's attention. The way he stood at a position that resembled parade rest, the manner in which he addressed a superior officer, and the vocabulary that suggested familiarity with military protocol. Many contractors who worked on military installations picked up certain habits through proximity, but Marcus displayed something more fundamental. "Prior service?" Richardson inquired, though the question felt more like confirmation than genuine uncertainty. "Yes, sir." "Some time ago," Marcus replied, offering no additional details while maintaining the respectful distance appropriate to their respective positions in the facility's hierarchy. The conversation was interrupted by a group of SEAL candidates who needed access to their lockers. Marcus immediately stepped aside and continued his work without acknowledging the interruption, demonstrating the kind of situational awareness that military training instilled in personnel regardless of their current assignment. Richardson filed away his observations and continued his tour, but found his thoughts returning to the brief encounter throughout the afternoon. Training exercises that afternoon included advanced tactical scenarios designed to challenge even the most experienced candidates. Richardson positioned himself where he could observe both the participants and the support staff who maintained the facility during ongoing operations. Marcus worked around the edges of the action, emptying trash receptacles and maintaining equipment without interfering with the complex choreography of military training. During a particularly intense exercise involving simulated urban warfare, one of the training weapons malfunctioned in a way that could have disrupted the entire scenario. Before any of the instructors could respond, Marcus quietly approached the affected station and performed a quick field correction that kept the exercise running smoothly. The intervention was so subtle that most participants never noticed the interruption, but Richardson observed the entire sequence with growing interest. "Chief Williams, what do you know about Thompson's military background?" Richardson asked during the evening debrief. "Not much, sir." His employment application showed prior service, but he didn't elaborate on specifics. His references checked out, and he's been nothing but professional since he started working here. Keeps the facility in top condition and never causes any problems with the training staff. Richardson nodded thoughtfully. In his experience, men who had seen significant combat often preferred not to discuss their service with people who hadn't shared similar experiences. The fact that Marcus maintained such professional standards while working in a subordinate role suggested either genuine humility or conscious choice to remain unnoticed. The next morning brought an equipment failure that threatened to disrupt advanced training schedules. A critical piece of rappelling gear had developed stress fractures that made it unsafe for continued use. The replacement parts wouldn't arrive for several days, potentially forcing cancellation of specialized training that had been scheduled for weeks in advance. Richardson was reviewing alternatives when he noticed Marcus examining the damaged equipment during his morning cleaning rounds. The janitor studied the gear with the kind of detailed attention that suggested more than casual interest, running his fingers along the fracture lines and testing the remaining structural integrity with movements that spoke of technical knowledge. "See something interesting, Thompson?" Richardson approached quietly, curious about the older man's obvious familiarity with specialized military equipment. "The stress fracture follows the grain of the metal," Marcus observed, his voice taking on a more technical tone. "If you reinforce it here and here with field-expedient materials, you might be able to extend its operational life until replacement parts arrive. Not ideal for regular use, but sufficient for controlled training exercises with appropriate safety protocols." The suggestion demonstrated not only mechanical knowledge, but understanding of risk management principles that govern special operations training. Richardson found himself studying Marcus with renewed interest, seeing past the janitor's uniform to recognize something more complex underneath. "You seem familiar with this type of equipment," Richardson commented, testing the waters for additional information. "I've seen similar gear before," Marcus replied carefully, maintaining his professional distance while acknowledging the commander's implicit question. The temporary repair worked exactly as Marcus had predicted, allowing the training schedule to continue without interruption. Richardson made a point of thanking the older man personally, noting the way Marcus accepted recognition with quiet dignity rather than false modesty or excessive pride. Throughout the following days, Richardson found himself paying closer attention to Marcus's interactions with the facility and its personnel. The janitor demonstrated an intuitive understanding of military priorities, positioning his work to support training objectives without interfering with operational requirements. His knowledge of equipment maintenance extended well beyond basic custodial duties, and his situational awareness matched that of seasoned combat veterans. During a particularly challenging training evolution involving water survival techniques, Richardson noticed Marcus watching from his usual peripheral position. The older man's attention focused not on the spectacle of the exercise, but on technical details that most observers would miss. He tracked safety protocols, monitored equipment performance, and maintained awareness of environmental factors that could affect the training outcome. One of the candidates struggled during the water exercise, fighting panic as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm his determination. The instructors maintained their positions, knowing that overcoming such challenges was essential to SEAL training. But Richardson saw Marcus shift slightly, ready to intervene if the safety margin deteriorated beyond acceptable limits. The subtle movement suggested someone who had monitored similar situations before and understood the difference between productive stress and genuine danger. The candidate ultimately succeeded in completing the exercise, earning congratulations from instructors and fellow trainees. As the group moved to the next training station, Richardson approached Marcus, who was already positioning himself to clean the aquatic facility. "Good eye for detail," Richardson commented, referring to the older man's obvious attention to safety considerations during the water exercise. "Important to watch for trouble before it develops," Marcus replied, his tone suggesting experience with situations where early intervention could mean the difference between successful missions and preventable tragedies. The conversation was brief, but it added another piece to the puzzle that Richardson was gradually assembling. Marcus Thompson was clearly more than a contract janitor who happened to have prior military service. His knowledge, awareness, and instinct suggested someone who had operated at levels that required exceptional training and experience. As the week progressed, Richardson found himself developing genuine respect for the quiet man who maintained their facility with such professional dedication. Marcus never sought recognition or special treatment, but his contributions to the training environment extended far beyond his official job description. He was becoming an integral part of the team, even if most people never noticed his presence. The question that remained was simple. Who was Marcus Thompson, really? And why was someone with his obvious qualifications and experience content to work as a janitor at a facility where his true capabilities remained hidden beneath the surface of routine custodial duties? Richardson sensed that the answer to those questions would prove more interesting than he had initially imagined. The incident that changed everything began with a routine training exercise that went dangerously wrong. Advanced SEAL candidates were practicing close-quarters combat techniques when a malfunction in the simulation equipment created a scenario that none of the instructors had anticipated. What should have been a controlled training environment suddenly became a situation requiring immediate emergency response. Candidate Peterson, a promising young warrior with 2 previous deployment tours, found himself trapped beneath heavy training apparatus that had shifted during the exercise. The equipment pinned his leg at an angle that threatened serious injury, and the positioning made it difficult for standard rescue procedures to free him safely. The instructors quickly assessed the situation while Peterson fought to remain conscious despite obvious pain. Marcus was cleaning equipment in an adjacent area when he heard the commotion. He looked up from his work to see the cluster of personnel around the trapped candidate and immediately understood the severity of the situation. Years of experience had taught him to recognize emergencies that required immediate action regardless of official protocols or proper channels. "We need to get this weight off him, but the angle's all wrong," called out Instructor Martinez, who was trying to coordinate the rescue effort. "If we lift wrong, we could make the injury worse or bring down more equipment." The other instructors were highly trained professionals, but their expertise focused on combat tactics rather than technical rescue operations. They understood the urgency of the situation, but lacked the specific knowledge needed to safely extract Peterson from his predicament without causing additional harm. Marcus approached the group quietly, his trained eye already analyzing the structural problems that complicated the rescue. The equipment had shifted in a way that created multiple pressure points, and any attempt to simply lift the weight could transfer dangerous forces to Peterson's trapped limb. The solution required understanding of leverage, load distribution, and structural engineering principles that went beyond standard military training. "Commander," Marcus addressed Richardson directly, his voice carrying a new authority that hadn't been present in their previous conversations. "With your permission, sir, I might be able to help." Richardson looked up from the emergency situation, surprised by the change in Marcus's demeanor. The janitor's usual deferential manner had been replaced by the confident bearing of someone accustomed to making critical decisions under pressure. Something fundamental had shifted, and Richardson sensed that he was about to see a different side of the quiet man who had been cleaning their facility for 3 years. "What do you have in mind, Thompson?" Richardson asked, willing to consider any option that might help the injured candidate. "I need 2 lifting straps and a fulcrum point," Marcus replied, already moving toward the trapped candidate. "The weight distribution is creating a pressure differential that's maintaining the pin. If we can redirect the load through a controlled lift sequence, we can create enough clearance for extraction without causing additional injury." The technical language and confident assessment surprised everyone present. This wasn't the vocabulary of a janitor offering to help, but the precise communication of someone with specialized training in complex rescue operations. Marcus moved with purpose and authority that suggested extensive experience with similar situations. "Do it," Richardson ordered, stepping back to give Marcus room to work. What happened next would be talked about in the facility for months afterward. Marcus directed the positioning of lifting equipment with the precision of an engineer and the urgency of a combat medic. He calculated angles, directed force application, and maintained constant communication with Peterson throughout the extraction process. His hands moved with the steady confidence of someone who had performed similar rescues under far more dangerous conditions. "On my count," Marcus called out, his voice carrying the command authority that had been completely absent during his years of custodial work. 1, 2, lift." The coordinated effort freed Peterson in less than 90 seconds. The candidate was conscious and responsive, with injuries that appeared serious, but not life-threatening. As paramedics arrived to provide medical care, Marcus quietly stepped back from the center of activity and returned to his cleaning equipment as if nothing unusual had happened. But Richardson wasn't about to let the moment pass without acknowledgement. He had witnessed technical expertise and leadership skills that far exceeded anything he would have expected from a contract janitor, regardless of prior military service. Someone with Marcus's obvious capabilities didn't accidentally end up mopping floors at a SEAL training facility. "Thompson, I need to see you in my office," Richardson announced after the emergency had been resolved and Peterson was on his way to the medical facility. Marcus nodded silently and followed the commander toward the administrative section of the building. His bearing had returned to the respectful deference appropriate to his official position, but Richardson had seen too much to pretend that nothing had changed between them. The commander's office contained the usual military decorations and official photographs that marked senior officers' workspaces. Richardson gestured for Marcus to take a seat, then closed the door to ensure privacy for what he suspected would be a revealing conversation. "That was some pretty sophisticated rescue work out there," Richardson began, studying Marcus's reaction to the direct statement. "Not exactly standard janitor training. I've had some experience with emergency situations," Marcus replied carefully, maintaining the neutral tone that had characterized all their previous interactions. Richardson leaned back in his chair, recognizing the careful way Marcus answered questions without providing specific information. It was a technique used by people who had learned to protect operational security even in casual conversation, a habit developed through years of service and roles where careless words could compromise missions or endanger personnel. "Marcus, I'm going to be direct with you," Richardson said, abandoning any pretense of casual conversation. "What I saw out there wasn't basic emergency response. You demonstrated technical knowledge and leadership capabilities that suggest specialized training well beyond anything that shows up on your employment application." For a long moment, Marcus said nothing. Richardson could see the internal struggle playing out behind the older man's eyes, a battle between the desire to maintain his carefully constructed anonymity and the growing impossibility of hiding his true background from someone with Richardson's experience and observational skills. "I prefer not to discuss my prior service, Commander," Marcus finally said. "I'm satisfied with my current position and have no desire to complicate my situation with unnecessary attention." The response told Richardson more than Marcus probably intended. Men who sought to avoid attention to their military service usually had good reasons, and those reasons often involved either classified operations or personal circumstances that made civilian life preferable to continued military service. "I respect that," Richardson replied carefully, "but I also have a responsibility to understand the capabilities of everyone who works in this facility. What you demonstrated today suggests you might be overqualified for custodial work." Marcus's slight smile carried a hint of irony. "Qualifications are only relevant if someone wants to use them, sir. I've found satisfaction in honest work that doesn't require explanations or justifications." The comment revealed another piece of the puzzle. Marcus wasn't working as a janitor because he couldn't find better employment, but because he had chosen anonymity over recognition. That kind of deliberate decision suggested someone who had valid reasons for avoiding the spotlight that came with positions matching his obvious capabilities. Richardson found himself facing a dilemma. His respect for Marcus had grown considerably based on what he had witnessed, but he also understood the older man's desire for privacy. At the same time, he couldn't ignore the fact that someone with Marcus's skills might be able to contribute far more to the facility's mission than custodial services. "I'm not going to force you to discuss anything you prefer to keep private," Richardson said finally. "But I want you to know that I see more in you than what appears on the surface. If you ever decide you want to contribute to our mission in ways that match your capabilities, my door is open." Marcus stood to leave, pausing at the door to make one final comment. "Commander, I've been contributing to the mission in my own way for 3 years. Sometimes the most important service is the kind that nobody notices." After Marcus left the office, Richardson sat alone with his thoughts. The encounter had raised more questions than it had answered, but it had also revealed the character of a man who had chosen humble service over personal recognition. Whatever Marcus's background might be, he was clearly someone who understood the true meaning of dedication to duty. The afternoon brought renewed focus on training operations, but Richardson found his attention repeatedly drawn to Marcus as the older man went about his routine duties. Every interaction, every movement, every decision now seemed to carry additional significance as Richardson looked for clues about the man behind the janitor's uniform. The mystery of Marcus Thompson had become more intriguing than Richardson had ever imagined. The question was no longer simply who Marcus had been during his military service, but why someone with his obvious qualifications had chosen to hide those capabilities beneath the surface of routine custodial work. The answer, when it came, would prove more remarkable than anything Richardson could have anticipated. The revelation came 3 days later during what should have been a routine equipment inspection. Commander Richardson was reviewing maintenance logs when Chief Williams approached with a concerned expression and a manila folder containing personnel records that had arrived from the Department of Defense Archives. "Sir, you requested background verification on all contract personnel," Williams said, placing the folder on Richardson's desk. "This came back from the Archives Division. I think you need to see this immediately." Richardson opened the folder, expecting to find standard service records showing Marcus Thompson's basic military history. Instead, he found himself staring at documents that carried classification markings and redacted sections that indicated involvement in operations far beyond routine military service. The few visible details painted a picture that stunned him into silence. Master Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thompson, United States Navy SEALs. 3 Purple Hearts, Silver Star, Navy Cross. Multiple classified deployments between 1985 and 2010. Unit designations that Richardson recognized as the most elite special operations teams in the American military. The man who had been mopping floors and emptying trash cans was a decorated war hero whose service record read like a catalog of the nation's most dangerous missions. "Jesus Christ," Richardson whispered, studying the partially redacted documents that hinted at operations in places that officially never happened. "How long has he been working here?" 3 years, sir," Williams replied, his voice reflecting the same shock that Richardson was experiencing. He applied for the custodial position through standard contract procedures. His application mentioned prior military service, but didn't include any specifics about rank or assignments. Richardson continued reading, piecing together a career that spanned 25 years of continuous combat operations. The dates indicated service in Grenada, Panama, the Persian Gulf, Somalia, Afghanistan, and Iraq. Multiple deployments to locations that remained classified even in official records. Commendations for actions that were described in language so carefully worded that it revealed nothing while suggesting everything. The medical records were equally revealing. 3 combat wounds serious enough to warrant Purple Heart medals. Extended rehabilitation periods following injuries that would have ended lesser men's careers. Psychological evaluations that mentioned combat stress and recommended extended recovery periods. A final medical board review that concluded with voluntary retirement rather than forced separation. Why would someone with this background choose to work as a janitor? Richardson asked, though he suspected the answer lay in the psychological evaluations and medical records that documented the cost of a quarter-century spent in the world's most dangerous places. Maybe he just wanted to disappear, Williams suggested. Some of these guys come back from that level of operations, and they can't handle civilian life. They need structure and routine, but they don't want responsibility or attention. A job like this gives them both anonymity and purpose. Richardson nodded, understanding the logic while still struggling with the implications. Marcus Thompson wasn't just any veteran seeking quiet employment. He was a legend whose exploits would be studied in special operations training for decades to come. The fact that such a man had chosen to clean their facility suggested either profound humility or deep personal wounds that made ordinary recognition unbearable. The folder contained one additional document that explained everything. A letter from the Department of Veterans Affairs discussing Marcus's participation in a program designed to help special operations veterans transition to civilian employment. The program specifically placed highly decorated personnel in positions that provided structure and purpose without the stress of leadership responsibilities or public recognition. Marcus had been wounded in action for the third time during a classified operation in Afghanistan. The injury wasn't just physical, but psychological, leaving him with what the medical reports carefully described as combat stress reactions that made continued operational duties inadvisable. Rather than forcing retirement through medical channels, the Navy had worked with veterans advocates to find positions that would allow men like Marcus to maintain dignity while recovering from invisible wounds. Richardson closed the folder and sat in contemplation. Everything about Marcus's behavior at the facility now made perfect sense. The military bearing that never quite disappeared, the technical knowledge that exceeded his job requirements, the situational awareness that marked career military personnel, and the leadership instincts that emerged during emergencies. Marcus Thompson was a warrior who had chosen to serve in a different capacity rather than abandon service entirely. The question now facing Richardson was what to do with this information. Marcus had clearly chosen anonymity for personal reasons that deserved respect. At the same time, Richardson felt an obligation to acknowledge the service of a man whose sacrifices had contributed to American security in ways that most citizens would never understand. "Chief, this information doesn't leave this office," Richardson decided. "Thompson chose this position for reasons that we need to respect. But I want you to make sure he gets every courtesy and consideration that his service record deserves, even if we can't acknowledge it publicly." Williams nodded his understanding. Military protocol had strict guidelines for respecting the preferences of personnel who sought privacy following distinguished service. Marcus's choice to work in an anonymous capacity was protected by regulations designed to prevent unwanted attention to veterans who needed space to heal from their service experiences. That afternoon, Richardson encountered Marcus during routine facility inspections. The older man was performing his usual duties with the same quiet efficiency that had characterized his work for 3 years, showing no awareness that his background had been discovered. Richardson found himself studying Marcus with new eyes, seeing past the janitor's uniform to recognize someone whose contributions to American security had been extraordinary. "Thompson, how's everything running today?" Richardson asked, keeping his tone casual while fighting the urge to render honors to a man whose service record commanded profound respect. "All systems operating normally, Commander," Marcus replied, his standard response carrying new meaning now that Richardson understood who he was addressing. "Is there anything specific you need me to check on?" The conversation was routine, but Richardson heard undertones that he had missed during their previous interactions. Marcus spoke with the precision of someone accustomed to detailed reporting and the confidence of a man who had successfully completed missions that others couldn't even imagine. His awareness of facility operations extended far beyond custodial duties because his training had taught him to monitor and understand complex operational environments. "Actually, yes," Richardson said, making a decision that felt right despite its complexity. "I'm planning some changes to our training protocols, and I'd value input from someone who understands how facilities support operational readiness. Would you be willing to provide some observations about how our current setup affects training effectiveness?" Marcus paused in his work, studying Richardson's face with the careful attention of someone accustomed to reading between the lines of official communications. The invitation was carefully worded to offer participation without compromising his chosen anonymity, and Richardson could see the mental calculation as Marcus weighed the potential benefits against the risks of increased visibility. "I'd be happy to provide input, sir," Marcus finally replied. "I've observed a lot of training operations over the past 3 years. There might be some operational considerations that could improve efficiency." The agreement represented a subtle shift in their relationship. Richardson was acknowledging Marcus's capabilities without forcing him to abandon his chosen role. while Marcus was accepting the opportunity to contribute more meaningfully to the facility's mission without sacrificing his privacy. It was a compromise that honored both men's professional obligations and personal preferences. Over the following days, Richardson began consulting Marcus about operational questions that took advantage of his expertise while respecting his desire to remain in the background. The conversations were always private and informal, framed as discussions rather than formal briefings. Marcus provided insights that reflected decades of experience with training programs and facility management in some of the world's most challenging environments. The rope climbing station could be more effective if you adjusted the anchor points, Marcus suggested during one such consultation. The current configuration creates artificial stress patterns that don't match real-world conditions. A simple modification would provide better training value. The recommendation demonstrated exactly the kind of practical knowledge that Richardson had hoped to access. Marcus understood training objectives from the perspective of someone who had actually used those skills in combat, and his suggestions reflected hard-won experience rather than theoretical knowledge. The relationship that developed between Richardson and Marcus was unlike anything either man had experienced in their military careers. Richardson found himself learning from someone whose expertise exceeded his own, while Marcus discovered that he could contribute meaningfully to training operations without accepting formal recognition or responsibility. It was a partnership built on mutual respect and shared commitment to excellence in preparing America's future warriors. The mystery of Marcus Thompson had been solved, but the solution had created new opportunities rather than simple answers. Richardson now understood that he was working with a legend, while Marcus had found a way to continue serving without compromising his need for healing and anonymity. The arrangement would prove beneficial to everyone involved, especially the young SEALs who would benefit from training improvements guided by one of the most experienced operators in American military history. 6 months after discovering Marcus Thompson's true identity, Commander Richardson watched the graduation ceremony for the latest class of Navy SEALs with a satisfaction that extended beyond typical command pride. The improvements suggested by Marcus had been quietly implemented throughout the training facility, resulting in measurably better performance from candidates and more efficient preparation for the challenges they would face in operational environments. The young men receiving their tridents had benefited from training enhancements that they would never know existed. Equipment modifications suggested by Marcus had improved safety margins while increasing training realism. Facility modifications had created better learning environments. Most importantly, the insights of a Master Chief with 25 years of special operations experience had been woven into every aspect of their preparation. Marcus stood at his usual position during the ceremony, maintaining the cleaning equipment that kept the facility spotless for such important occasions. To the graduating SEALs and their families, he remained invisible, just another member of the support staff who made their achievements possible. But Richardson knew that Marcus's contributions to their success had been profound, even if they would never be publicly acknowledged. "Congratulations, gentlemen," Richardson addressed the new SEALs during his speech. "Your training has prepared you to join the most elite military force in the world. You've earned the right to wear the trident through dedication, sacrifice, and the guidance of instructors who demand nothing less than excellence. Take pride in your achievement, but remember that earning the trident is just the beginning of your service to our nation." After the ceremony, as families celebrated and new SEALs prepared for their first operational assignments, Richardson approached Marcus in the equipment storage area where the older man was organizing supplies for the next training cycle. "Another successful class," Richardson commented, watching as Marcus arranged gear with the same meticulous attention to detail that characterized everything he did. "They're good kids," Marcus replied, his tone carrying the fond pride of someone who had watched the candidates struggle through training and emerge as warriors. "They'll do well if they remember their training and trust their teammates." The simple statement reflected wisdom earned through decades of leading similar young men in places where those lessons meant the difference between life and death. Marcus had watched hundreds of new SEALs begin their careers, and his assessment carried weight that came from experience rather than hopeful optimism. "I've been thinking," Richardson continued, "about ways to formalize your contributions to our training program. There might be opportunities that would allow you to share more of your expertise while maintaining the privacy you value." Marcus paused in his work, considering the suggestion with the same careful deliberation he applied to all important decisions. The invitation represented a recognition of his capabilities while respecting his desire to remain in the background, and Richardson could see the internal debate as Marcus weighed the benefits against potential complications. "What did you have in mind?" Marcus asked, his tone suggesting cautious interest rather than immediate enthusiasm. "Technical advisor role," Richardson explained. "Unofficial position that would allow you to provide input on training protocols and facility improvements without changing your current job status. No formal recognition, no publicity, just the opportunity to help us prepare these kids more effectively." The proposal addressed Marcus's dual needs for meaningful contribution and personal anonymity. He could continue working as a custodian while providing the kind of expert guidance that only came from his unique combination of experience and perspective. It was a solution that honored both men's professional obligations and personal preferences. "I'll consider it," Marcus replied, which Richardson understood to be cautious acceptance of a role that would allow him to serve more effectively without sacrificing his chosen anonymity. Over the following weeks, the arrangement developed into something that benefited everyone involved. Marcus continued his custodial duties while providing increasingly sophisticated input on training modifications that improved both safety and effectiveness. His suggestions were implemented without fanfare, creating continuous improvements that enhanced the facility's ability to prepare future SEALs. The young SEAL candidates never learned that their training had been enhanced by insights from one of the most decorated special operations veterans in Navy history. They completed obstacle courses that had been modified based on combat experience in dozens of countries. They used equipment that had been improved through suggestions from someone who understood its applications in real-world environments. Most importantly, they benefited from training protocols that reflected hard-won lessons from a quarter-century of special operations. Marcus's psychological healing continued during this period, supported by the knowledge that his expertise was contributing meaningfully to national security even though his active service had ended. The work provided structure and purpose while allowing him to process the experiences that had shaped his character and defined his service. He was finding peace through continued contribution rather than complete separation from military life. Richardson mentioned during one of their informal consultations, some of the other training facilities have heard about our improved performance metrics. They're asking about our methods. Marcus looked up from the equipment he was maintaining, understanding the implications of Richardson's comment. Success in military training communities rarely remained secret for long, and improvements significant enough to attract attention from other facilities suggested that their collaboration was producing measurable results. "As long as it helps train better warriors," Marcus replied, "I'm satisfied with whatever recognition the program receives." The statement reflected his fundamental character, a man more interested in mission success than personal credit, someone who measured achievement by the quality of results rather than the visibility of his contributions. It was the attitude that had made him successful during his operational career and continued to drive his commitment to excellence in his current role. The facility's reputation for producing exceptionally well-prepared SEALs grew over the following months. Candidates who trained there consistently performed better in advanced schools and operational assignments. The improvements were attributed to enhanced training protocols and facility management, with no mention of the contributions made by a janitor whose expertise remained hidden from public view. Richardson submitted recommendations for Marcus to receive civilian recognition for his contributions to military training, carefully worded to acknowledge his impact without revealing details about his background or current role. The awards would be processed through channels that respected his privacy while ensuring that his service received appropriate acknowledgement within the military community. On the anniversary of the day when Marcus had saved candidate Peterson during the training accident, Richardson found him working in the equipment room where their first meaningful conversation had taken place. The older man was performing routine maintenance with the same careful attention that had characterized his work from the beginning, but there was a sense of satisfaction in his demeanor that had been absent during his first years at the facility. "Any regrets about the path that brought you here?" Richardson asked, genuinely curious about Marcus's perspective on the choices that had led from combat operations to custodial work. Marcus considered the question while continuing his work, taking time to formulate an answer that reflected his true feelings rather than polite responses. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of someone who had carefully examined his life and found peace with his decisions. "Every path serves a purpose," he said finally. "My operational career contributed to national security in obvious ways. This work contributes differently, but just as meaningfully. The young men who train here deserve the best preparation we can provide, regardless of how that preparation is delivered or who provides it." The philosophy reflected a mature understanding of service that transcended rank, recognition, or traditional measures of success. Marcus had found a way to continue contributing to something larger than himself, while healing from the wounds that such service had created. He had discovered that meaning came from the work itself, rather than acknowledgement of the work. As Richardson left the facility that evening, he reflected on the lessons he had learned from watching Marcus Thompson navigate the transition from decorated war hero to anonymous custodian to informal technical advisor. The experience had taught him that true service often operated below the surface of public recognition, and that the most meaningful contributions frequently came from people who sought no credit for their efforts. The quiet janitor had become a cornerstone of their training program, proving that heroism could be expressed through humble service just as effectively as through dramatic action. Marcus Thompson had found his own path to continued service, one that honored his past while creating a meaningful future. His story would never be told publicly, but its impact would be felt by every SEAL who benefited from training improved by his insights and dedication. In the end, recognition had come in the form that mattered most to Marcus. The knowledge that his experience was helping prepare the next generation of warriors for the challenges they would face in defense of their nation. The tattoo on his neck remained hidden beneath his collar, but the service it represented continued through his daily work in ways that honored both his past achievements and present contributions.